Let's talk about fear today. And before I go straight in it, I want to play you a little tiny piece of a song that I wrote a while ago. And one verse is about fear. I'm walking on the road of fear. It's dark and cold and lonely here. But fear is just desire hiding deep inside my chest. So I keep on walking. I keep on walking. I keep on walking. I keep on walking, yes, I keep on walking. I keep on walking on this road of fear. I keep on walking. I keep on walking. Welcome to another shot of ecstasy with me today on Fear is Just Contracted Desire. Fear is just contracted excitement in our chest, in our hearts. And how is that to be understood? Have you ever experienced in your life that the very thing that you're fearing the most is somehow over and over manifesting in your life? Maybe you're afraid to lose your partner and it keeps happening. Maybe you're afraid to never find somebody and it keeps happening. Maybe you're afraid to not have enough money and it keeps happening to you. So of course, fear is a very strong emotion, and in essence, because emotions are like magnets. Any kind of emotion that you have works like a magnet. It draws towards it what you're emitting. So if you're emitting a frequency of love and joy and bliss and ecstasy, then more of that will come to you. If you're emitting a frequency of fear and pain and sorrow, then more of that will come to you. That is the first law of why this is. But really and truly, when we look at this idea of fear being contracted excitement, it helps us to make friends with our fear, rather than being afraid of I shouldn't be afraid of, I shouldn't be afraid because now I'm going to bring more of that to you. That can bring a little bit of a vicious cycle of fear of being afraid. We don't want to be afraid of our fear. We want to make friends with our fear, and we want to understand what actually is the lesson underneath it. So in any kind of fear that we're having, and I don't mean the fear that you're having when you're standing at the edge of a cliff and you're afraid of falling down. Even there, actually, there's a little bit of that excitement of flirting with death. That's why it's oh, wow, I'm standing at this edge of this cliff, and if I'd fall, I'd probably die. And there's a bit of us, there's a part in us that likes that excitement, that likes the flirting with death, even though we're very afraid of it. And this principle applies to all kinds of fears that we're having. I was in an event once where we were asked to group up with two people, in threes we were in total, and we were supposed to speak our deepest fears and our deepest desires. And then we would play out the deepest fear scenario, and then afterwards the deepest desire scenario in these groups. And they were kind of around us, there were quite intense fears that were being played out. So we would ask the people to be the actors in our fear scenario. And it was very intense energy in the room in that moment. And then we would shift, after a couple of minutes of playing that, we would shift into the deepest desire and play that out too. Needless to say, many of these fears and desires were in sexual nature, were very deep-rooted shadow fears. And actually one of the deep realizations that many people had after was that the fear and the desire were really the same, just in a different frequency, just in a different, they had a different taste to it. But in actuality, the underlying essence of the fear pointed to the deep desire. So if maybe somebody had a rape fantasy and that was, or a rape fear of being raped, in some way the desire was also to be taken deeply and fully and consciously. Of course, the difference is that the fear of being raped is is unconscious and draws an unconscious perpetrator into your life, while the desire of being taken fully, of surrendering, of letting go, of not having to do anything and just being completely and utterly broken open to God, penetrated to God, is a different frequency of the same thing. So when we understand that this excitement, that everything that we're not allowing ourselves to be, everything where we're contracting around our desires, is going to generate this kind of fear. So I also have a very good example when it comes to jealousy. I've experienced in my own life and in open relating scenarios with Sai that I only experience jealousy when I'm not connected to my desires, to my own desires, when I'm not living my own sexual freedom, when I'm not stepping into my own juiciness and following what I want to do. So when I don't do that, then I experience a lot of pain around connections that he might have, or maybe even just stories that I have in my mind. But the moment I connect to me and I follow what I want to do, may that be connecting with others, or maybe it's just being with myself sexually and liberating my own body through self-pleasure practice or whatever I have in my toolbox. So the moment I connect to me and find what is for me, and not expecting him to fix anything or do anything for me, that moment, that pain transforms completely. And there's none of the jealousy, and it's just not there. And I've experienced it on both of our sides. So also for Sai, when he's experienced the pain when he wasn't connected to his own wanting certain touch, his own desires of being loved, of being taken, of being ravished, of being wanted. When he wasn't connected to that, he would project it onto me and then create a lot of suffering for himself. And the same was true for me. So jealousy is also a kind of a contracted fear. It's a contracted desire. That's actually what we experience as a deep fear. But really it is your call to step into what you want to do, without the attachment to who can do that for you. Maybe you yourself have to do whatever you want for yourself. Maybe you have there's an attraction that you're not following, or that you haven't ever followed because you were afraid to be judged, to be not loved. So this is obviously reflections from an open relating scenario, and this is not relevant for everybody. But even in a monogamous setting, when you're in a partnership and you committed to each other in that way, even then jealousy is really contracted excitement. So when you experience jealousy, then the question is, how can we bring excitement? How can we take the lid off this how can we take the lid off this contraction and bring excitement into our life? So once, for example, I did something really beautiful with Simon, where we realized that we both have in our core erotic theme, we have the theme of secrecy. It's a really big turn on for us, but both of us, we are very much into authentic communication and openly sharing. So it's like secrecy doesn't really have a place in that. We can't really be secret with each other if our values are to be very honest and open with each other. So we came up with this idea to cheat on each other with each other. So we created alter egos, and we did this little role play where he and me, we had two different names, and we had a WhatsApp chat, and we would like speak to each other as if we would be secretly cheating on each other, but we were the same people. So it was an incredible experience that ramped up our sexual energy and our desire intensely, because it played into our core erotic themes, and we honored that there was a need for us to bring more excitement into our space. And it was really amazing. Like, we had an incredible, when we actually came together and had this date, the secret date, we were so lost in the roles. We were so lost that at some point we started crying with each other into the night, because we literally felt like we were cheating on each other in some way, and it kind of just boomed our hearts open, and we looked into each other's eyes, and it was just really magical moment. So there's a lot underneath our fears that we're experiencing in intimacy, or anywhere in your life. They really are calling for you to bring that which you are afraid of into a more conscious field, and then experience it with all of you. Then the grip of the fear, the unconscious grip of drawing something in that you don't actually want, will lessen, and you'll give it space, you give it permission to be there for you. How beautiful is that, when we allow our desires, our darkest, deepest desires, to just find an expression. Because if you don't, you will fall into little patterns of addiction. So an addiction is really also a contracted desire. It is like a little pill that we take. And it doesn't have to be drugs. It can be food or watching Netflix. It's a little quick fix that helps us to deal with this excitement, this contracted desire that we have, that we're not allowing us to live, that we're not allowing ourselves to live. So we just keep taking little things that help aid the pain around that, rather than confronting the actual desire that is underneath it. If you really look at what you're fearing the most, you will find your deepest desires. So at the moment, there's like a massive cultural, societal fear of death on the whole earth. It's like a frequency everywhere. What can we learn from that? That there's actually a really beautiful calling into clearing up our relationship with death. It is really a massive, massive calling for us all to understand what death actually is, and to liberate the fear that we have around it, and feel that there is such magic when we shift our connection to death. Because when you don't no longer fear death, but realize that your life is can end at every single moment, your life will change. You will no longer waste time. You will no longer not live the moment. Because what if I told you that in 5 minutes you are going to die? You're probably going to switch off this video, go outside, do the thing that you never did, or just really experience every single moment now in the deepest depths possible. Death is a great teacher. And the way we've been dealing with death culturally in the last hundreds of years is detrimental to our ability to be in the moment. And the way we've been fearing it globally at this moment is actually our desire to shift the relationship that we have with death. To come into harmony with nature is to come into harmony with death, because death is and will always be part of this dual world. So what are your deepest fears? What are they boiling up inside of you? What are you really afraid of? Look at that. Ask it. What desire is hiding underneath it? Find that sweet spot. Ramp up your creative energy and create space for your desires to be heard, to be seen, to be experienced. You only have this one life. We have this one life in this body. You have this one life in this body. You might have others in other bodies, but with this consciousness, with this awareness that you're cultivating right this moment, you have one life. What are you going to do with it? Keep hiding from all the fears, or diving straight into it? Fear is your friend. Fear is actually your direction. Fear is pointing you where you need to go in order to expand into the greater version of yourself, in order to expand your ability to love, in order to expand your ability to feel. Yes, often we are afraid of the feelings that we are not allowing ourselves to feel. I was afraid of feeling anger. Whoa. Any kind of situation that had a little bit of a charge for many years before I started my anger work and started to really dive into feelings and what that actually means to feel ourselves deeply. I was completely contracted. Every time there was a little conflict, I would just freeze and run off. But really, there was desire inside of me to embody power. And when I started to step into my anger and feel the immensity that comes through a body when you are really able to scream it out, to roar your deepest, darkest animal. Wow. This power that came through me, that was what my fear was pointing me to. It was saying, hey, come here, have a little look. There's something for you here to embody. There's something for you here to live, to expand into. And now anger isn't no longer needed to always be this massive explosion. Now anger can be orgasmic for me. Now anger is just an emotion that rides through my body, and I'm like, wow, because I've trained my body to be able to circulate it. I no longer contract around it. The same is true for any other emotion that you're feeling, maybe contraction. Some men, many women as well, but some of us have trouble crying. There's a deep desire to release underneath that trouble to cry. Really, your heart just wants to soften. It wants to relax. It wants to release. It wants to feel itself. It no longer wants to hold on. So the desire under fear of tears, or the mechanisms that we have to swallow it down, is to simply surrender, to let go. And these are really the two sides. Yeah, it's quite easily described with fear, or with tears and rage. These are the most, like the feelings that we keep avoiding the most. Either one of them usually. And it's surrender that we're fearing, and it is our power that we're fearing. It is our clarity. It's our strength that we're fearing. And the fear is pointing us into that direction. Learning how to surrender and learning how to step into your biggest, deepest power will lead you to expanding all of you. Will lead you to peace, will lead you to ecstasy, will lead you to silence, will lead you to being content even in the eye of the storm or in the middle of the storm. And this is what we need right now. On this planet, with everything changing so crazily, we need to be connected to our deepest truth, to our desires, and also aware of our fears. Because when you're aware of your fears, you know where you're being called to. You know what avenue to take. Are you courageous enough to walk that path? And let me remind you, courage doesn't mean without fear. Courage means despite the fear. Courageous people are not people who don't have anything that they fear. They're actually full of fear. They're walking into the battlefield full of that fear, but knowing that this is the way that they need to go. This is why we admire people who are courageous, because we see that they are overcoming the fear of the fear, that they're walking into the fire, no matter what. Because the call of their heart is strong enough, is stronger than the fear itself. So I'm calling you into your heart. I'm calling you into your deepest desires and acknowledging what they actually are and listening to what they want you to experience. It's usually not the very thing, but it is a little flip on the fear. And then this hold of the fear can let go of you, because fear is a very contractive emotion that can pull so much of your energy and can manifest so strongly the things that you don't want. So take care of your fears, make them your friends, and look deeply at what their message is. And especially in sexuality, and I just want to say that here at the end, especially in sexuality, we have a lot of desires that are very contracted, because we're living in a world that is sexually repressed, sexually very contracted. So there's a lot of things that we might desire that are in the shadows. And when you have a lot of sexual shadow desires, then you will naturally start to act them out in your sexuality, and that's not really what we want. you can act them out consciously with somebody who's willing to go with you that way and release yourself of the contraction and actually experience the openness. That's beautiful work, BDSM, sexual shadow work. There is where you can explore that, and you do it consciously rather than unconsciously hurting maybe the partner that you had or that you have, or hurting yourself in the process. Fear is always an invitation to bring more consciousness to yourself, like pain is. Pain is pay attention inside now. P-A-I-N. Pay attention inside now. Any pain, any fear is for you to look, oh, whoa, there's a call. There's a call for me to step deeper into my desires, into my excitement. So if you were struggling with your sexual fantasies or your sexual suppression, please, please, please join Go Touch Yourself. Come on a journey with us. We are there with you. We're supporting so many people in this training. It's such a blissful container with so much courageousness and so much heart showing up for this topic that is so suppressed and we're so uneducated in our sexuality. It's really next level. There's so much more to be experienced in the realms of that sexuality. So it really starts with you. Don't push it onto your partner to become the best lover so that you can finally have the orgasms. No, it's your responsibility. It's your responsibility to confront and to feel into what you want and how you want to touch. You need to explore yourself first before you can expect that from anybody else to come to you. Then when you marry yourself, when you're actually in love with yourself from the deepest, darkest and lightest corner, then, wow, the coming together with your partners will be beautiful for them. We had somebody on the course recently, and I just want to share this, who's been on the course for 2 years, and he's been doing the practice really for 2 years, very on and off, but kind of very deeply dived in, really, really deeply. And he had a partner before, and then they broke up, and now he's had a new partner, and he said it's incredible how much his lovemaking has shifted throughout this, like through embodying all the practice that he's done. And it's kind of a slow shift that you don't necessarily notice, and now he's coming into the space with his new lover, and what he's experiencing in lovemaking is blowing him off his hooters, is blowing him off his chair. Is so beautiful. When I listened to him, I was like, oh wow, this is really what's possible. But we gotta give ourselves the time. We gotta give ourselves the time to look into our desires, to look into our fears, and walk that path. If this, like, some people are like, masturbation, how can I even talk about that? That was me many, many years ago. I was so contracted around the fact that I was masturbating for so many years in my life, and I could not share that with my partners. When I did eventually share it to one of the first men that I shared it with, the amount of energy that released from my system, the amount of freedom that I felt through that confession was so huge. It boomed my heart open. It opened my ability to make love in a different way, even though that back then I was still very unconscious around my sexual energy. So I walked into the fire of my fear. My biggest fear was to talk about this with anybody, to share my orgasm with anybody. And then when I walked through that gate, wow, so much released. And I'm sure, and you can let me know in the comments, but I'm sure all of you have had this experience where you had a fear, you confronted it, you went straight through it, and you never regretted it afterwards, because what actually happened afterwards you didn't know before, but it was always worth it. It's a little bit like going to the gym. Sometimes we have resistance to it, but we never regret working out or dancing or moving or doing something for our body afterwards, because usually it just feels good. The same is true with fear and our desires, or the contracted desires. I've never really regretted going for that, even when the fear was strong. I regretted not going for it. I regretted not stepping into the fire and letting opportunities pass. That for sure. And many people on their deathbed say exactly that. They haven't regretted what they did. They regret what they didn't do. So, there you go. I'm sending you off into this day with the inquiry into your fears. What are you fearing? That might be a sign of a deeper desire that you're not owning fully, that you're not finding enough expression for in your life. Sending you love on a beautiful day.